I remember the day the council declared mercy. The Chamber of Concord burned with refracted light, thousands of crystalline panels catching the suns of 100 systems. It was beautiful, in the way a blade is beautiful just before it cuts. Every species had gathered, the scaled, the feathered, the luminous. And at the center of that radiant amphitheater stood the humans. They did not shine. They absorbed the light, even bruised, bloodied, their uniforms torn and charred, they stood like statues of defiance. No banners, no insignias, only the mark of endurance etched into every scar. The war was over. The impossible had been achieved. The enemy, those that had devoured fleets and worlds, were ash thanks to them. Yet when victory came, it terrified us more than any defeat ever had. We called the session to order beneath the golden crest of the council. The first speaker's voice quivered as he began the proclamation. For the preservation of peace across the known galaxy, the species known as humanity shall be barred from all acts of sanctioned warfare. Each word struck like a pulse of thunder through the chamber. The decree was coded in rhetoric, compassion, unity, mercy, but none of us missed the truth beneath it. This was fear disguised as law. I had seen their fleets once, machines that moved like living storms. I had watched human commanders stand upon burning bridges, issuing orders not of conquest, but of protection, even for those who had once called them enemies. Their will had no limit. And it was that will we could not contain. The humans did not interrupt. They listened as if attending their own funeral. Some among us hoped they would protest, that they would rage. But when the final words were spoken, when the sentence of peace was sealed into history, they only nodded. Their leader, a woman with gray at her temples and eyes that seemed carved from the void, stepped forward. Her voice was soft, calm, utterly devoid of tremor. If peace is what you fear will break, then we'll take it elsewhere. A murmur rippled through the chamber. No one dared respond. I remember the way her words hung in the air, like a promise we couldn't understand. The humans turned and walked out, every step echoing like the drumbeat of inevitability. As they departed, I caught the faintest reflection of their faces in the chamber glass. They were not defeated. They were thinking, planning, measuring the stars beyond our reach. The council erupted in relief once the doors sealed. Delegates applauded, some even wept. The first speaker declared it the dawn of a safer era. I wanted to believe him. Truly I did. But in the quiet that followed, I noticed something no one else did. The crystal walls, the same that had magnified our pride, were fractured. Hairline cracks, thin as spider silk, running from ceiling to floor, as if the architecture itself had recoiled from the words we had spoken. I lingered long after the others had gone. Through the chamber's great windows, I could see Earth's fleet departing, those massive ships dimming their banners, their engines burning faint blue trails into the dark. They did not flee. They simply left. I realized then that we had not removed war from the galaxy. We had only exiled its masters. The Council's proclamation would be praised, recorded, and celebrated for centuries. The day mercy was declared. But mercy is a curious thing. When bestowed in fear, it becomes something else, something dangerous. For years afterward, the phrase haunted me. Mercy was supposed to end bloodshed. Instead, it had drawn a boundary line in the stars, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. And though we had declared them banished, I could not forget the look in their eyes. Not anger, not sorrow, resolve. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see them walking away through the golden light, silent, unbroken, unknowable. The species we had tried to cage had simply stepped beyond the bars, and somewhere in the void between suns I could almost feel it, the first pulse of movement. The quiet, patient heartbeat of a civilization preparing for something we would one day beg them to stop. For a time, the galaxy exhaled. Decades slipped by like the slow drift of dust through the void. The great empires rebuilt their trade networks. The Council's banners fluttered once more above reconstructed capitals. Even the youngest species, those who had never seen war, began to whisper that perhaps humanity had been overrated, that the stories of their fire and fury were exaggerations born of fear. I knew better. By then, I had been assigned to the Terran Observation Initiative, what most of us quietly called the Exile Watch. The humans were to be monitored, their colonies mapped, their fleets tracked. Officially, it was a precaution. Unofficially, it was fear disguised as duty. The Council believed the silence beyond Sol meant compliance. But I had studied their history. I knew silence was never their surrender. It was their preparation. Our listening arrays were tuned to the faintest whispers of radio static. For years, nothing. Then, one night cycle, the feed came alive. Faint bursts of coded transmissions, too structured to be natural, too deliberate to be accidental. Bursts of light that pulsed from unregistered coordinates beyond the Perseus reach. At first, the Council dismissed it. Old beacons, they said. Residual activity. But I followed the pattern. The signals were organized. A network forming itself in the dark. Humanity had gone quiet, yes, but not idle. When I was finally permitted to visit one of their outer colonies, designation Erebus 9, I expected ruins or frontier settlements. What I found instead was impossible. The planet hung like an ember beneath a black sun, its surface threaded with orbital rings, vast structures that pulsed with energy and precision. Not shipyards, not fortresses, forges, massive constructs suspended in the void, building things I could not name. Human workers moved along the platforms in exosuits, their movements methodical, almost ritualistic. They looked thinner than before, paler, but their eyes burned brighter. The air itself hummed, as if the metal and the humans were breathing in rhythm. Their leader, a technician barely past her third decade, greeted me with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Council oversight, right? You're late. Her tone was polite, dismissive, as though I were an afterthought. I tried to mask my unease and asked the obvious question, what are you building? She turned toward the viewport. Beyond the glass I saw it, a lattice of silver and black spanning hundreds of kilometers. Not a ship, not a weapon, something else. Insurance, she said, for what comes next. When I pressed further, she only laughed softly. You exiled us from war. You never said anything about survival. Every report I sent back was redacted, buried under political language and false calm. The Council did not want to hear that humanity was changing. They preferred to believe the humans were broken, content to fade. But in the cold between the stars, something magnificent and terrifying was being born. I began to notice subtle shifts in their transmissions. The patterns were evolving, becoming denser, layered in harmonics no machine should need. They weren't just communicating. They were training something, perhaps their AIs, perhaps themselves. The lines between flesh and circuit blurred in their silence, and all the while their colonies expanded outward. One by one, faint pinpricks of light began to appear across the galactic map, each too distant for trade, too aligned for coincidence. When connected, the coordinates formed a shape, a ring, enclosing the Council's claimed space like a patient predator waiting to strike. But when I brought this to my superiors, they laughed. They're isolated, one said. Harmless. Let them build their toys. Harmless. The next time I received a signal from the Terran expanse, it was encrypted in patterns no Council codebreakers could decipher. Only one line translated cleanly. We're not fighting anyone. We're just preparing for what comes next. No threats. No declarations. Just that cold, steady certainty. Sometimes, in the observation logs, I swear I could feel them watching us back. As if through the static and light, something human, something vast, was staring from the edge of known space, measuring how long we would take to notice. The Council called it paranoia. I called it instinct because peace had grown too quiet, the kind of quiet that hides a heartbeat. And somewhere beyond the mapped stars, I could feel it beginning again, the same rhythm I'd once felt on the day of their exile. The heartbeat of a species that does not rest, does not forget, does not forgive. It began with whispers through static. At first, we thought it was interference, dust storms, magnetic waves, the usual anomalies that haunted the Orion Rift. That region was a graveyard of stars, a scar across the galaxy that no sane species dared to cross. Yet within a single rotation, the whispers became screams. Distress signals, fragmented, desperate, flared and died in seconds. Entire colonies gone. Fleets dispatched to investigate vanished into silence. The Council convened emergency sessions, the great chamber flickering with holograms of wreckage and radiation charts. The patterns of destruction defied every weapon we knew, hulls melted inward as if devoured, debris drifting in geometric spirals that looked designed. Whatever had come from that darkness was not chaos. It was intention. And for the first time in living memory, the Council had no idea what to do. The empires argued. Some demanded retaliation, others evacuation. I watched the first speaker tremble beneath the weight of extinction, wearing an unfamiliar shape. And as the rift expanded, swallowing systems that had thrived for centuries, one name returned to the chamber, whispered like a curse and a prayer in the same breath. Humans. They had been silent for nearly 70 years. The records of their exile were buried under propaganda and pride. But as the unknown crept closer, even the proudest races began to ask the unthinkable. What if they were the only ones prepared for this? So we went to them. The Council dispatched an emissary fleet, diplomats, scholars, envoys, and me among them. We crossed the border into the Terran expanse, expecting defenses, hostility, perhaps even open fire. Instead, we found order. The human colonies were thriving, not in opulence, but in structure. Stations spun like clockwork around dying stars. Orbital platforms gleamed with quiet precision. There were no military insignias, no banners of conquest, only the symbol of a ring surrounding a single star, etched into metal and light. They called it the Vanguard. When our ships entered their domain, a transmission locked to every channel simultaneously. This is Terran Command. State your purpose and intent. Weapons cold, engines stable, or you will be escorted. Their tone was calm, unthreatening, but absolute. We obeyed. We were brought to a structure orbiting a pale blue dwarf. Its name was Haven. A misdirection, I would learn. There was nothing safe about it. It was a forge, a citadel, a crucible where humanity had reshaped itself. When the airlocks opened, I expected soldiers in armor. Instead, we were greeted by engineers in utility suits, men and women marked with grease and starlight, their movements measured, deliberate. They regarded us not with hostility, but with the calm of predators who had already calculated every possible outcome. Their commander approached, a tall human with silvered hair and eyes that gleamed like cold fire. His voice, when he spoke, was almost kind. The Council sends emissaries. I assume things have gone poorly. We told him everything, the rift, the missing fleets, the devoured colonies. We showed him the images, the twisted metal, the hollow planets, the signals that screamed and then fell silent. He listened without interruption. When the final image flickered away, he simply nodded. So, it has begun. The words froze us. Begun. You exiled us for mercy, he said softly, and we accepted that mercy. But mercy does not mean blindness. You thought the wars were over. We saw they were only changing shape. Behind him, the viewport dimmed, and through it, the stars came alive. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Then I realized it was movement. Hundreds, no, thousands of vessels shifting formation in the dark. Not battleships, guardians. Their hulls shimmered with adaptive plating, engines pulsing with the rhythm of coordinated thought. We've been building for this, the commander continued. The silence between stars was not peace. It was the calm before something very old woke up. We asked what he meant, but he only looked past us toward the rift's direction. His expression, half pity, half resolve, told us enough. You didn't notice it because you never looked beyond your maps. You built your empires on comfort. We built ours on the edge of extinction. A pulse rippled through the room, a low hum like a living heartbeat. The human ships outside shifted into a vast crescent formation, their lights aligning with mathematical perfection. It was less a fleet than a response mechanism. Every signal from our ships was mirrored, tracked, categorized. They weren't preparing to strike. They were preparing to protect. The Council had feared their return as conquerors. But what I saw in those human eyes was far worse, for it was not rage that moved them. It was duty. When the commander finally turned back to us, the room seemed smaller, the air heavier. "We will deal with the rift," he said. "Not for you, for everyone. And if we refuse your interference," one of the envoys dared to ask. The human's gaze hardened. "Then you'll refuse your survival." The chamber fell silent. Outside, the Terran armada ignited its drives, the cold blue light spreading across the void like dawn breaking through darkness. The human fleets moved not as soldiers, but as extensions of a single purpose. Every motion was precise, synchronized, terrifyingly efficient. We had thought we'd seen their peak during the wars of the past. We had been wrong. The humans we had banished had not stagnated. They had evolved. And as our fleet turned to retreat, I felt the gravity shift, a subtle pull as hundreds of Terran war forges began to awaken. Lines of light rippled across their hulls, linking them in a web that stretched toward the Orion Rift. A barrier was forming, a wall of light and metal between civilization and whatever waited beyond. The humans had been silent because they were listening, watching, preparing, and now they were moving. They came from beyond the rim, out of the dark no map had ever dared to mark. At first, they were little more than sensor ghosts, unexplained radiation flares, gravitational distortions, whispers on the edge of our deepest scans. But then the stars themselves began to disappear. Whole systems winked out, their suns swallowed by clouds of shimmering particulate matter. The Council called them the silicates. It was a poor name for what they truly were. They weren't a species. They weren't even alive in the way we understood life. They were a hunger, clothed in metal and logic, a swarm of biomechanical entities that devoured matter itself. They left behind hollow planets, stripped of crust and atmosphere, their cores polished to reflective bone. We had fought wars before, but this was extinction rendered methodical. The Council's grand fleets, the same armadas that once brought 1,000 worlds to heal, burned in less than a month. Their plasma cannons meant nothing against something that could rebuild itself from debris. Their tactics collapsed. Commanders screamed for reinforcements that would never arrive, and as the silicates turned toward the human frontier, despair consumed every transmission. But then, silence. For weeks, no data left that region. We thought humanity had fallen like the rest of us. Then the first recordings arrived. I still remember the flickering image, a Terran defense line, 3 dozen ships against a wave of metallic horrors. The swarm blotted out the stars, a tide of glinting claws and shards moving as one. The human vessels didn't retreat. They didn't even form ranks. They moved individually, instinctively, like predators in perfect coordination. They fought with a style that defied logic, appearing in bursts of radiation, striking, then vanishing into folded space. They weren't fighting for victory. They were containing the swarm, manipulating it, redirecting its path into dead zones and trap corridors. Where Council ships had tried to meet power with power, humans fought with understanding. "You can't stop them," one Terran transmission said, "but you can teach them where not to go." The swarm adapted, but so did humanity. Each battle was a lesson, every loss a recalibration. For every Terran ship consumed, 10 more appeared from the void, each smarter, faster, deadlier. They used the enemy's own debris to construct new weapons mid-battle, shaping molten armor from the wreckage of war. I saw a recording of one such vessel once, designation TNS Mercy. Its hull bore no national flags, no symbols of pride or conquest. Only 4 words etched in deep black against pale silver, "For all life." It was then I understood. The humans were not fighting for themselves. They were fighting for us all. Every empire, every species that had once mocked or feared them, now watched the Terran frontier blaze with light. The swarm struck, retreated, struck again, and each time the humans were there first, already adapting, already ready. They had turned survival into strategy, chaos into design. Where our fleets had fallen in weeks, theirs endured for years. The Council scrambled to re-establish contact, to offer aid, but humanity refused open coordination. Their messages were short, precise, almost ritualistic. Containment active. Vectors isolated. Losses acceptable. Do not advance. They weren't asking for help. They were protecting us from ourselves. I was stationed aboard a monitoring post near the border when the swarm reached within a few light years of our position. The stars glowed sickly green from the silicate presence. Then the Terrans came. Dozens of ships slid into view without warp trails, as if they had always been there, cloaked in the folds of the void. The commander's voice came through our systems without request for access. Calm, human, resolute. You are advised to evacuate this sector. We will hold, I whispered. Against that? Then I saw what they meant. The human vessels began to burn, not from damage, but by design. Their cores ignited in controlled collapses, forming singularity webs that pulled the swarm apart, molecule by molecule. Each explosion was precise, mathematical, a dance of annihilation and sacrifice. When it was over, the stars had gone dark. The silicates were gone, so were the Terran ships. But hours later, new vessels emerged from the debris fields, rebuilt, reborn, carrying the same markings as before. The same names. It was as if death itself had become part of their strategy. We learned later that many of their fleets operated as distributed minds, AIs linked to human consciousness, capable of regenerating from fragments of data scattered across systems. They had turned themselves into living contingencies. When I finally stood aboard a Terran vessel, a silent invitation delivered after the third major victory, I felt as though I was walking inside a living organism. The walls pulsed faintly with light, the air alive with the quiet hum of power. A young human officer guided me to the bridge. "We don't win by destroying them," she said. "We win by teaching the galaxy how to survive them." She looked out into the void where the swarm had been, her eyes reflecting starlight like twin suns. "This isn't war anymore," she whispered. "It's stewardship." And I, who had once voted to ban them from warfare, could only stand there, speechless, realizing what their exile had truly forged. They had been denied the right to conquer. So they had learned instead to protect, to fight not for dominance but for preservation, to wield destruction as a shield for life itself. When word of their victories spread, the galaxy watched in awe. No anthems, no parades, just quiet efficiency and purpose. For every world they lost, they reclaimed 10. For every civilization that fell, they built sanctuaries in its name. The Council once called them dangerous. Now we called them our salvation. When the silicate threat was finally halted, at least for a time, the galaxy tried to remember what peace was. But peace was no longer something that could be decreed. The Council reconvened in its shimmering towers, eager to reassert control, to reclaim command over the defense of the galaxy. They sent envoys, fleets, and proclamations. They wanted humanity's armadas to stand down, to return to oversight and order. But humanity did not answer to the Council anymore. They had built something beyond it, beyond bureaucracy, beyond politics, beyond fear. An empire not of borders, but of purpose. They called it the Terran Vanguard. It began quietly, as all revolutions do. The scattered remnants of human colonies, isolated AIs, refugee fleets, and allied worlds united under a single, unspoken understanding. No one else was coming to save them. The Vanguard had no throne, no capital, no anthem. Its fleets were coordinated by distributed AI cores known as Archons, each linked to thousands of human minds across light years. Decisions were made in seconds where the Council would have taken months. Every captain was trained to think like an entire army, strategists who could command entire fronts alone, guided by intuition amplified through machine symbiosis. They didn't wait for orders. They were the orders. When the Council's ultimatum came, demanding the dissolution of the Vanguard and a return of all military command to proper governance, the reply was, broadcast across every frequency, from the core worlds to the rim. You banned us from war. You never banned us from protecting what we love. Those words became a spark that burned through the galaxy's political order. Council fleets were paralyzed, their crews unwilling to fight the very forces that had saved them. Senators resigned in protest. Border worlds, long neglected by the Council's bureaucracy, declared allegiance to the Vanguard overnight. What began as rebellion became revelation. The Terran Vanguard didn't conquer worlds, they rescued them. Systems left to decay under the Council's indifference found food convoys, medical drones, and orbital defenses waiting in silent orbit, all stamped with the same emblem, a single blue circle on white, representing the cradle of Earth, and the message was always the same. We ask for no tribute, only commitment. Species that had once mocked humanity now volunteered their fleets to the cause. Engineers from the Keva built hybrid reactors for the Vanguard's ships. The crystal artisans of Vothar constructed energy shields capable of withstanding silicate disintegration waves. Even the cold-blooded strategists of the Mer Dominion, ancient rivals of humankind, sent their war scholars to train under Terran officers. One Mer general famously said, "They do not lead through dominance. They lead through certainty." The Council's response was predictable. Denial, followed by fear. Official broadcasts condemned the Vanguard as rogue militarists, existential destabilizers, the greatest threat to unity since the first expansion. But the words rang hollow, because for the first time in millennia, unity was real. Entire species began defecting in waves. Council banners were torn down in capital plazas. Local governors pledged loyalty not to the Council's distant authority, but to the Vanguard's living purpose. And humanity, once exiled for being too dangerous to trust, became the foundation of something transcendent. The Vanguard's ships operated in total silence. No propaganda, no ceremony, only precision. They would appear without warning in systems on the brink of collapse, repel pirate armadas or silicate remnants, and vanish again without request for payment or praise. The Council called them ghosts. The people called them guardians. In a matter of years, the Vanguard's influence stretched farther than any empire in recorded history. Not through conquest, but through example. Their code was simple, almost sacred. Protect life where it stands. Never strike first, but never yield. Build where others destroy, and above all, remember the silence of Earth. That phrase, whispered across 1,000 worlds, became a legend. It reminded the galaxy of the time when humanity had been banned, humiliated, forgotten, and of what they had become because of it. I was there. When the Council tried to force a reckoning, they assembled a peace enforcement fleet. 2,000 ships drawn from every loyal species. Their goal was simple: blockade the Vanguard's strongholds and force humanity to submit to centralized command. The fleet never reached its target. Halfway through the journey, their navigation arrays went dark. Communications died. Their own AI systems began transmitting unknown signals. And then, in the void ahead of them, 1,000 Terran ships emerged. No weapons charged, no shields raised. Their flagship transmitted a single message. This is not a blockade. This is a choice. What happened next would change history forever. Entire squadrons of the Council's fleet powered down their weapons. Captains defected mid-transmission. Crews cheered, broadcasting their allegiance to the Vanguard lived to the entire galaxy. The Council's authority collapsed overnight. Their grand chamber, once filled with argument and arrogance, echoed only with silence and static, but the Vanguard did not replace them with tyranny. They built something else. In place of borders, they drew corridors of safety, interstellar highways patrolled by autonomous guardians, open to any species in need. In place of armies, they raised relief fleets, warships repurposed to terraform shattered worlds and rebuild civilizations. And where once humanity had been accused of chaos, now their very name meant order. The irony was not lost on any of us. The species we had exiled for being too unpredictable, too emotional, too dangerous, had become the architects of stability itself. Yet even then, a quiet tension grew. The silicates were not gone. They were waiting. The Vanguard knew it. That's why their fleets never stopped moving, why their archons never slept. They weren't building an empire for conquest. They were building one for the storm that would return. I had thought I'd seen the worst the galaxy could offer, the fall of empires. The collapse of worlds, the day Mercy became exile. I was wrong. The war against the silicates had raged for years now across systems no star charts could contain. Every month another world fell silent beneath the metallic tide. Every victory came at the cost of 1,000 lives. Even the Terran Vanguard, the unstoppable force of calm precision, began to fracture beneath the strain. And yet, when all others faltered, they stood. When the Council's fleets were shattered and their core worlds burned beneath black storms of devouring nanite clouds, there was only one choice left. They summoned humanity once more, those they had cast into exile, to lead a final campaign, and humanity answered, not with pride nor vengeance, but with a single simple truth spoken across every channel. If not us, then who? I was there, an observer aboard the Aegis Concorde stationed in the orbit of the dying star Valar 9, where the final stand would take place. The Vanguard called it Operation Solstice. To the rest of the galaxy, it was suicide. They gathered what remained of their armadas, vast flotillas of iron-gray ships gleaming like storm clouds around a fading sun. AI cores sang through the void in perfect synchrony, coordinating movements faster than thought. Their commanders, human to the last, operated with an eerie serenity that made my blood run cold. We watched as they began their impossible plan, to turn a dying star into a weapon. The silicate swarm advanced in numbers beyond reason, an ocean of mirrored shards devouring all light. Their collective hum reverberated through space like a heartbeat made of static. They consumed debris, ships, even the wrecks of their own. Nothing endured their hunger, but the humans had prepared for this. They had transformed Valar 9 into a trap. Massive gravitic spires orbited the star's corona, linked in a lattice of quantum tethers. Every fragment of energy, every particle of heat was being siphoned and compressed. The Vanguard called it Project Eventide. From the command decks of the Terran flagships, I heard the orders: cold, clinical, final, initiate collapse sequence. All outer fleets, engage burn vector. Containment perimeter, hold until ignition. It was a war of attrition on a scale no mind was built to grasp. Human fleets hurled themselves into the swarm's path, buying seconds with lives. Entire colonies volunteered their defense platforms, their habitats, their very worlds to maintain the gravitational lattice. Every second mattered. Every second brought them closer to the breaking point. I saw their ships vanish one by one, flashes of light swallowed by the metallic flood. And still the human voices on the comms remained calm. Sector Delta, breach imminent. Acknowledged. Redirecting drones. Keep the star stable. Understood. For all life, for all life. Those 3 words echoed across 1,000 dying ships. A mantra that burned brighter than fear. And then, it happened. The star screamed. Its core, overfed with redirected energy, imploded, then detonated outward in a wave of impossible fury. Space itself bent as light shattered into plasma and radiation. The silicate swarm, billions strong, was caught in the surge. They burned, melted, broke apart into vapor and silence, but so did the humans. Half the Terran Vanguard's armada was gone in an instant, vaporized, erased, consumed by the very weapon they had unleashed. Their sacrifice was total, their silence absolute. When the light finally faded, the void was calm once more. No silicates, no movement. Only the quiet remains of ships drifting in the glow of a newborn neutron star. I remember the way the council chamber felt in the aftermath, its once bright walls dimmed by the news. Every species that had once mocked humanity now bowed their heads in silence. The council proposed a monument, a galaxy-spanning tribute to the fallen, but humanity refused. When the Vanguard's surviving emissaries returned, their faces were lined not with triumph, but with grief. We didn't do it for gratitude. one said, voice steady despite the sorrow. We did it because someone had to. That single sentence rippled through every communication network, repeated in every language until it became scripture. The galaxy tried to honor them anyway. Worlds renamed their cities, children learned their stories. But humanity continued forward, quiet, purposeful, untethered by glory. They rebuilt their fleets not for conquest, but for watchfulness. Because peace, they understood, was never free. It demanded vigilance. It demanded sacrifice. It demanded that someone, somewhere, bear the weight of what others could not. I was granted clearance to visit the remnants of the vanguards, Central Archive orbiting the neutron star that had once been Velar 9. The station was quiet, half buried in ice, illuminated by the blue shimmer of the collapsed sun below. Inside, I found memorial data scattered across transparent screens, logs, recordings, fragments of final transmissions. One in particular has never left me. To whoever finds this, if you're hearing this, we did what we had to. Don't mourn us. Don't build statues. Just promise you'll be ready when the next storm comes. Because it will come. It always does. The voice paused, then softened almost tenderly. And when it does, remember what humanity became in the dark? I remember leaving that station with a weight I could not describe. For all our technology, all our councils and fleets and empires, we had never understood the true price of peace until humanity showed it to us. They had turned exile into purpose, war into protection, death into meaning. And in doing so, they reminded every species that peace was not a treaty signed in a chamber. It was a promise kept in blood and fire. The galaxy never returned to what it had been before. How could it? The war had burned away illusions, the illusion of safety, of order, of the Council's infallible control. What remained was raw and uncertain, and alive. In the silence that followed the collapse of the silicate threat, the Galactic Council convened one final session. It was a gathering steeped in humility, for even the most arrogant species had seen the truth. Humanity's name, once spoken with fear or disdain, now carried the weight of reverence. The motion was brief, almost whispered. The ban on Terran warfare is hereby rescinded. No applause followed. No speeches marked the end of the decree that had once defined our age. The counselors could not even meet one another's gaze. We all knew the truth. Humanity no longer needed permission. They had outgrown the galaxy that once judged them. When the edict was announced, no human delegation appeared to acknowledge it. No celebrations echoed across their worlds. Their response was silence. A silence that said everything, because they had already moved beyond it. The Terran Vanguard, now a vast coalition of allied systems, AIs, and hybrid species, had become something new. Not an empire, not a federation, but a living network of free worlds bound not by treaties, but by shared resilience. They called themselves the Unbound. Each world in their alliance was autonomous, yet united by a single creed carved into every ship's hull. Every colony's foundation stone. Duty is freedom. Freedom is responsibility. We protect, therefore we endure. It was not law, it was legacy. And as centuries of council bureaucracy began to crumble under its own weight, the Unbound rose quietly in its place. I remember standing aboard an orbital platform above the council capital when I first saw the Terran fleets departing once more. Their ships, sleek, silver, and alive with faint blue light, moved with a grace that defied gravity itself. They no longer resembled war machines, but living vessels, designed for exploration as much as defense. Where once their armadas had darkened the stars, now they illuminated them. One by one, the fleets ignited their drives and turned toward the galactic rim, the edge of every known chart, where starlight thins and cosmic dust swallows all. I found myself beside the Terran ambassador, a figure of quiet composure whose eyes carried the same depth I had seen in soldiers. "Philosophers and ghosts, where are you going?" I asked him. He smiled, softly, almost sadly. "Beyond the map," he said. Someone has to see what's next. Those words lingered like starlight long after their ships were gone. The departure was not a mass exodus, it was a migration of purpose. Humanity left no capital to rule from, no fleets to guard their new allies. Instead, they left behind knowledge, star charts rewritten with precision, quantum archives of technology centuries ahead of anything the Council possessed, and educational nexuses that trained any willing species in the art of self-defense and self-governance. They gave the galaxy the tools to protect itself, and then simply walked away. Some saw it as arrogance, others as prophecy, but I understood. They were explorers again. The same restless spirit that once drove them from the cradle of Earth now called them into the infinite dark. Reports trickled in across decades. Fleets of the unbound seen skimming the edges of black holes. Research stations built within the lightless void between galaxies. Ghost transmissions encoded in patterns no known AI could decipher. The humans were still out there, watching, guiding, becoming, and while the Council's successor governments bickered and fractured, their people looked to the empty stars where humanity had vanished, wondering when, if, they would ever return. I kept one relic from those years, a fragment of a Terran drive core, recovered from a derelict ship adrift beyond the Perseus Veil. Its surface was engraved with words in their native tongue, an epitaph. Perhaps or a promise, we were told not to fight, so we learned to build instead. And in building, we learned what it means to be unbroken. The phrase glowed faintly when touched, as though the metal itself remembered. For a time, I believed that would be humanity's final legacy, a quiet myth that would fade into the songs of younger civilizations. But legends have gravity. They draw belief, and belief draws destiny. The unbound creed spread like fire in the dark. Civilizations that had once bowed to the Council now stood on their own, inspired by the example of the humans who had refused to surrender to fear. They called it the Second Dawn, an age not of conquest, but of awakening. Across the stars, banners bearing the circle of Earth fluttered once more, not as emblems of rule, but as reminders of endurance. Decades became centuries. The Council became memory. And one night I stood again beneath a sky unscarred by war. Through my telescope, I saw them, faint pinpricks of blue moving across the galactic halo. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, slipping between the void currents where even light bends away. I realized then that humanity had not left us behind. They were still clearing the path ahead. They had simply gone where no one else dared to look. The stars shimmered as if to acknowledge them. I whispered a question to the empty dark, one that countless others must have asked before me. Will they ever return? And in the static of my comms, I thought I heard it, a voice faint and far, carried by echoes older than time itself. We never left. It has been generations since the Terrans vanished beyond the rim. For most, their name is myth now, half-believed tales told in star academies and whispered over dim tavern lights in the outer sectors. They call them the Banished Empire, the guardians beyond the void, the unbound. Each name carries its own reverence and its own fear. I am old now, older than the colonies themselves, my bones heavy with gravity from a dozen worlds. I have seen the rise and fall of countless powers, the rebuilding of the Council, the birth of new federations. But none have ever filled the silence humanity left behind, because humanity was not just a species. They were a lesson. We built our modern fleets on their designs, our engines on the principles they pioneered, our laws on the codes they lived by. Every innovation carries a shadow of their fingerprints, tiny quantum signatures buried in our own algorithms, as though they knew we would one day follow their path. Even our language changed. In the old tongue of the Council, the word human once meant unpredictable. Now, it means unyielding. Our academies teach history with reverence. In every lecture hall, there is always a moment of silence before the lesson begins. It is not commanded, it is tradition. The cadets call it the quiet oath. They say it honors the moment when humanity accepted exile instead of defiance, and still found a way to become greater than their punishment. I have stood among those cadets. I have seen the determination in their eyes, the same fire the humans carried into every war, every act of mercy, every impossible choice. Once we feared their chaos. Now we envy their clarity. There are still those who doubt. Scholars who insist the unbound were only a myth, that the stories of ships moving through the intergalactic void are just static echoes, relics of ancient battles long decayed. They mock the old tales, like the story of the human commander who turned a dying star into a weapon to save 1,000 worlds, or the engineer who taught alien species to terraform with nothing but stellar dust and math. But those of us who remember, the ones who heard their voices across the comms, who saw their fleets rise from exile, we know better. We have seen the evidence written in light itself. Every century or so, a new anomaly appears at the edge of our observatories. Gravitational signatures that don't belong. Faint energy bursts too structured to be natural. Some say it's coincidence. Others say it's them, the unbound, still watching, still guarding, still keeping their promise. Last year, on the world of Velis Prime, the children gathered in the night to watch a meteor shower. The sky burned with streaks of silver and blue, but one light didn't fall. It rose, cutting across the atmosphere like a blade of dawn. Our instruments tracked it. Velocity inconsistent with any known craft. Energy readings impossible for our reactors to produce. It accelerated past escape velocity, then vanished into the dark between systems. On every frequency, for just a heartbeat, came a whisper carried by static. For all life. 3 words. That was all. And yet every system that heard it reported the same thing. The phrase translated automatically into their native languages, even those without compatible code bases. It wasn't transmission. It was memory. A resonance in the quantum substrate itself. As if the galaxy itself remembered the humans who once swore those words. There is a belief among the elders of my world that one day, when the stars begin to dim and the galaxies fall silent, they will return, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as witnesses to guide us one final time when the cycle of creation begins anew. The humans always said that the universe was alive, that every civilization, every spark of thought was part of something greater than itself. They believed that no act of compassion, no sacrifice, no defiance in the name of life ever truly vanished. It simply echoed forever in ways we could not yet perceive, and perhaps that is their true immortality. Now, when the deep space storms roll across the void, we listen to the silence between the signals. Sometimes, faintly, a pulse emerges, a pattern too deliberate to be random, the rhythm of a heartbeat. Old engineers and explorers gather around the receivers, holding their breath, hoping to hear what their ancestors once feared and loved. And sometimes, just sometimes, a voice answers. It is never loud, never clear, but always human, still watching, still building, for all life. The transmission fades before we can trace it, but the message remains, encoded into the hearts of every species they touched, because that was what humanity truly left behind. Not weapons, not empires, but resolve, the courage to protect without dominance, the will to rise without hatred, the strength to stand alone in the dark and still reach out a hand for others. They taught us that strength was not the power to destroy, but the refusal to surrender ever. And so, when the stars dim and silence falls again, we do what they once did. We look to the void and whisper the same vow that forged legends for all life. And when the comms crackle, when the faint hum of the deep black sings back in return, we listen, because somewhere beyond the rim, where maps end and eternity begins, the unbound still walk the dark, still watching, still waiting, still human.